Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this live session from Selwyn District Council. This is the Selwyn District Council candidate briefing session for the local government elections for 2025. This evening I'm joined by Anthony Morton, who is our Electoral Officer for Selwyn District Council, and Steve Gibbling, who's the Executive Director for People, Culture and Capability, and who also works with the Malvern Community Board at this moment in time. This evening we're going to take you through a couple of presentations, one around what it means to run and be for a councillor for Selwyn District, and then Anthony will cover off some more detailed presentation slides around being a candidate. We're intending to run the session for an hour, and shortly we'll put up a screen which will show you the relevant QR code, so you'll see it now. It talks to visit slido.com. You can find that and enter the code as you see below, or scan the code, so it'll give you a couple of moments to do that, and that will enable you to submit a question as we take you through the slides. So I'll just wait for a moment and give everybody who has joined us an opportunity to do that. Okay, thank you. So I'll move on to our first set of slides. So for the elections of 2025, so the Waikirikiri Selwyn District, as I'm sure many of you know, has been the fastest growing district in New Zealand for quite a number of years, certainly the last 15 years. We have a population of 86,000 people, and that has grown from about 34,000. Most of the change will have taken place post-earthquakes, but that was a shift that we started to see before the earthquakes actually happened. We have a relatively young population, and the average age of our residents are 37. Our population expands from the mountains through to the sea, so we're a really good mix of urban and rural communities. And of course we have quite a diverse population that goes with that as well. About 20% of our population are under the age of 18, and we also have an increasing ageing population as well. We are projected in 2034 to hit a population of around 109,000, which takes us onto a similar size as regards to Dunedin. So what is council responsible for? So we have quite a breadth and range of activities, from infrastructure, district and urban planning, and local recreation services, as well as libraries, communities halls, civil defence, and waste and refuse. Currently, at the moment, in the Local Government Act, it requires council to think about the four well-beings. We do know in the future that the Local Government Act may change, but as it stands moving into this election, we are required to think about the general well-being of our community. And that's one of the base principles that we use as we think about all of the services that we provide. The list there in front of you is not a catch-all for everything, but it does give you a broad sense of the kind of services we look to provide to our community on a day-to-day basis, 24 hours over 365 days. We are guided by Waikirikiri Katua Future Selwyn, so that is our overarching strategy and vision for the Selwyn District. And this has been brought together and compiled through feedback from our community. So this is us listening to what our community say they want this district to look like going into the future. We've also had additional information that has come in through the long-term plan as well. And really what we're hearing from our community is a sense of having an intergenerational vision and district over the long term for the next 10, 50 to 100 years. And it's really about having that strategic vision that thinks about spatial and urban growth and what that will look like. What we are hearing is that we want to have a good mix and a good understanding and equity of services across our rural and urban areas. And we're also hearing from our community that in terms of they want to be able to live, work and play within the district. And that quite often means that they don't want to be perceived as being a suburb of Christchurch. They want to be a district where they can have all of their needs met. And of course, as we continue to grow and services develop and new employment comes, that will provide those opportunities into the future. We also hear from our young population too that they want to be able to have employment in the district once they've finished school or when they have moved through into university. So this next slide just shows an overarching strategic direction for Waikirikiri Selwyn, and out of that you can see the strategic priorities, and it focuses on a variety of different areas that's important to our community, and this is what our community have told us. So you can see there is transport, people and communities, the economy is really important, and infrastructure. Below you will see some outputs, and this is around how we deliver the long-term vision. So we use area plans, the long-term plan, and district plans, and policies and bylaws as the vehicles to deliver that long-term strategy. So the next few slides will cover off how Council operates from the governing body through to chief executive decision-making and working together. So what we have and what we utilise is the 4 pillars of governance. So the 4 pillars that I've outlined on this slide are taken from the Institute of Directors, and this really reflects the importance of governance at a council level. So the structure that we have councillors and a mayor, and they are responsible for setting the strategy, direction and vision for the district. Council employ only one person, and that one employee is the chief executive. And my role is to deliver the strategy and the vision on behalf of the councillors. From a governance point of view, the councillors monitor and observe and ensure that the chief executive officer delivers the strategy as they wish to see fit. So it's really around holding the chief executive officer to account and to make sure that the CE ensures that we are compliant as an organisation. The chief executive then recruits and hires and has responsibility for all other staff members within the organisation. It really is a critical role and partnership between the council and the chief executive, and it is one based on good, strong relationships. And there are areas of shades of grey where sometimes governance and operational working together can cross over. That's okay. What's really important is that we have a good understanding about how we work in areas that are shades of grey to get the best outcomes for our community. So how our elected members serve our communities? Again, I reflect back on the partnership between councillors and the chief executive and my executive leadership team. And it's about how we work collaboratively, proactively together. And what's really important, and again, we're really keen to support councillors to ensure that we deliver what our community are asking for. Councillors, there are a variety of different ways that elected members can choose to serve their community. Generally, as a rule of thumb, the mayor, who is the head of council, works with councillors and works to have a cooperative and united front to be able to make the best decisions for the community and for the direction of the district. And quite often there is times when there will be agreements to disagree, and that's actually okay. That's healthy, and that's considered to be good democracy. Each councillor will undertake the role in a really quite different way, and I would encourage you to talk to current councillors, because everybody has a subtly different view as to how they choose to carry out their role for council. So the time commitments can vary. Currently, as it stands at the moment, we have Wednesdays set aside for council meeting days, for governance days, and for briefing sessions for councillors. The rationale behind why one day a week has been put aside is it is understood that some councillors have other roles that they need to fulfil as well. So we try to keep one captured day a week, and that's when it can be dedicated to council time. Of course, it's not always going to be a 9 to 5 working office hours. So quite often our community groups meet in the evening times or at weekends, and quite often councillors will choose to attend to those meetings in the evenings and weekends as well. We also have periods where we have hearings and deliberations, whether it's through the long-term plan or district plan. Quite often that can require some additional time, and that may happen 2 to 3 times in a year, where there may be a commitment of up to 20 to 30 hours a week that is required. What we try to do, though, is to work collaboratively with councillors where possible to set those time frames as much advance as we can within the calendar, so that enables councillors to be able to adjust their time to make sure that we can accommodate and have as many councillors available as possible, particularly for those key strategic decisions. Support for elected members. So along the lines of the pillars of governance, we have a support package which will enable councillors, if they so choose, to undertake the Institute of Directors training. And there's a variety of different courses and webinars. We also have group membership for Institute of Directors. And I know a lot of councillors can find that quite beneficial to participate in. We also have Local Government New Zealand have a really robust training package called a Koina, and that is available online and can be accessed as part of our membership fees for LGNZ. We also have Local Government New Zealand sector meetings. So at least every quarter there is a requirement to be in Wellington, and that's where the whole sector comes together and has the opportunity to meet with politicians, to see what's topical at a strategic central or local government area. Currently what we do is we have a rotating roster for councillors to enable that everybody has a chance at least once a year to attend a regional and sector meeting. And that's to enable some good networking, but also to be connected into politicians so they can hear direct from those politicians about any new policy or legislation that may come into play. We also have South Island sector meetings as well that occur a couple of times a year, and again we have a rotating roster for councillors to be able to attend, and again it provides opportunity to work with South Island colleagues around topics of interest or where there is mutual benefit to be working together. And after each election, we hold a very thorough orientation programme and induction for councillors. And that can be spread over a 6-month period, because we recognise that for many it will be the first time being part of council, and there's a lot of information to take on board. There's a remuneration package, and the remuneration package that we're sharing online, that comes into effect from 1 July. So remuneration is set by the Remuneration Authority. They are an independent body, and they are the ones that make the decision for the remuneration for each council, and it is generally based off the size and scale and complexity of council, and they will undertake that review on an annual basis, and they are the ones who determine whether there's be any increase. Just excuse me a moment, my slide is... So I'm going to hand over now to Steve Gibbling, and Steve is going to cover off around Malvern Community Board.
Thanks, Sharon. So I have the pleasure of working with the current Malvern Community Board, and I'll just touch on a little bit about the role of community boards and how they support the community voice back to council. So community boards generally, and there are a number around the country that play a really key part in providing a link between small and separate communities of interest or areas that have a degree of representation need, and community boards work together to bring that community voice back to council for those big decisions. We have one community board in the Selwyn district, the Malvern Community Board, and they are made up of 5 members, currently 2 in Tāreba and 3 in the Hawkins subdivision, and that will be for the election. And we have 1 appointed member of council who will be sitting in that as well. The board's purpose is to make sure that it does connect and bring those key points to bear, and sorry, there we go. And they do that through a meeting each month. They use the same standing orders and code of conduct as council does. And monthly meetings occur of up to 2 hours where members provide written reports on the work that they've done within their community. Staff provide both financial reports and also reports on the work that has been undertaken by council in the local Melbourne Community Ward. The board is supported by the executive leadership team, who I'm a member of, and there are a number of my colleagues who attend along with our governance staff to ensure that those meetings move efficiently and effectively. In terms of time, similar to council, there is often a bit of information that's provided, and that's shared at least a week before each meeting so that there's plenty of time to read and understand and digest the information. Community boards are unincorporated bodies, and so they're neither local authorities nor committees. They have a degree of independence from council, and that provides and supports their advocacy role that they play for their communities. I'm going to hand back to Sharon now.
Yeah, thanks for that, Steve, and thank you for outlining Melbourne Community Board. We will have a suite of helpful documents that can be easily accessed. So we have a candidate guidebook, good governance guide, and we have council documents, the annual plan, annual report, long-term plan. And also, as a CEO, I'm required by legislation to write a pre-election report, which will be published on the 4th of July. And the pre-election report is really around a state of the nation at the time of publication as we move into the election period. So thank you for your attention, and I'm going to hand you over to Anthony now.
Great, thank you Sharon, and thank you Steve. Kia ora koutou, and good evening everybody. I'm Anthony Morton. I'm the Electoral Officer for Selwyn District Council for the 2025 election and continuing the process from the 2022 election. So as Sharon and Steve have outlined, they've taken you through how the council is structured and how the community boards and councillors work. I'm going to take you through the nomination process principally and just outline the do's and don'ts and some of the cans and can'ts that you need to look out for if you want to become a candidate, and then moving on from that to work through some of the downstream processes such as campaigning and results, etc. So a copy of the presentation file will be available from the council's website tomorrow. There's about 24-ish slides in my presentation. It covers quite a broad range of the subjects, so I'm not going to speak to every point on the slide, but it'll be a little test of your speed reading. I'll present the slide, just have give you a minute or so, or not a minute, but a few seconds to try and pick up the key points on there, and then I'll follow up with a bit of a summary as to what I think you need to be aware of from those points. Right, so just want to start with where I fit in. So I work for an election management company called elections.com. We're based in Christchurch. We're one of two election management companies around the country. The other one is based in Auckland. And in any given year, we'll carry out about 200 elections throughout the course of the year. That's other than council-related elections. Some of them are quite small, but generally they'll be national bodies or cooperatives that don't require some form of company office support. And then every 3 years we get engaged by lots of councils to carry out election-related processes. At least most of them engage us to count their voting papers, and nowadays most of them also get us to do perform the Electoral Officer function. So down the bottom of the slide there you can see the councils that have engaged us this year, and the top part of that is the city and district councils, the bottom line is the regional councils, and somewhere in there should be Selwyn. So in terms of the electoral team, so I'm the Electoral Officer, as I noted there before. On the day-to-day level, you'll be dealing principally with Therese Deval, who's our in Council Deputy Electoral Officer. So Therese and her team will work with handling the nominations and then ultimately issuing special votes when we get to the voting period. So most of your day-to-day contact, if required, will be through Therese and her team. But I've also listed down the bottom there my colleague, Warwick Lamp, who, if you continue and become a candidate, you'll hear from Warwick. He's an electoral officer for quite a few of the other councils that engage us, and he undertakes the communication process once nominations close, and he'll send out a number of emails to candidates just to keep you informed of what the next stages of the process are. In terms of the electoral officer role, so effectively the buck stops with me. The council engages elections.com. Elections.com then appoint me as the electoral officer. So I have to work with the councils, which we do closely, but I don't take any direction from them. In effect, the only person I'm responsible to is a district court judge if the election process goes to a challenge process. I do note the bottom point there at this stage because a lot of people think that we have some magical tool to control candidates' campaigning activities. Sadly, we don't. We don't have many levers within the legislation to allow that, so we just point that out at this point that a lot of the campaigning activity is up to the individuals, and we as electoral officers can't control that, but we will outline what we can control in one of the later slides. Timetable. So this is one slide that we will throw a wee bit more light onto, because last year the legislation changed and the voting period for council elections was finally extended. So it was previously a miserable 22 and a half days. It's now a slightly less miserable 32 and a half days. But the election process itself closes on the second Saturday in October still, and everything has been brought forward a little bit from that to squeeze in that extra 10 days voting period. So for this year, the nomination process starts earlier, so it starts 4th of July, and the most important date on there that I want to present to you is the 1st of August, which is the date that the nominations close. We can't go past that date, it's not extendable in any case, so please keep that in mind if you are looking to submit a nomination. Please don't leave it to the last minute. So I'll make that point several times through the remaining slides, but just to point that out now. Beyond that, the next most important date, probably from the candidate's perspective, is the 9th of September, which is when the voter packs will get mailed out. So if you are looking to stand and you're looking to do some campaigning, that's typically when the candidates want to organise their campaigning by, so that that's up and about when the voting documents get delivered. The dates beyond that, you'll see that the election itself closes on the 11th of October, and we will start issuing results shortly thereafter and cover that off in a later slide. The bottom note there, or the bottom date, is also another important one. Any candidates that do stand have to submit a declaration at the end of the election period outlining what they have spent in the way of campaigning costs and whether they have received donations over a certain value. Again, I'll go through that in more detail later, but it's just to make you aware that those declarations have to be back into us by the 11th of December. In terms of nominations, this is the schedule, if you like, of the positions that are available. The bottom point is obviously nothing to do with Selwyn District Council, but as a voter within Selwyn District Council, you would see a Environment Canterbury election issue on your voting paper if it gets to a contested stage. But for Selwyn, the top parts or the top points are the positions that are available, and we will be calling for nominations for those effectively from the end of this week. So that'll be generally through social media and the like, but additionally also in the public notice in the newspaper as well. And of course, if we get more nominations than there are vacancies, then we have to go to a voting process for those particular positions. one point to note there is that Selwyn has gone through a representation review, and as part of that there is now an at-large position. In fact, there are 2 councillors to be elected at large. So the point to note there is that those 2 positions are elected by all of the electors within the Selwyn. The other councillor positions are elected within the local ward areas. All right, so if you want to be a candidate, then these are the do's and don'ts that you have to be aware of, and I do want to go through these. So firstly, the candidate must be a New Zealand citizen, and you must be enrolled on the parliamentary electoral roll somewhere in New Zealand. You don't have to be a local as such, but you need to be enrolled somewhere on the New Zealand parliamentary electoral roll. But your nominators do have to be enrolled locally, and that's particularly relevant when you get down to the community board issues, where that, in Selwyn's case, their community board is subdivided, and so the electors for candidates in those particular positions need to be enrolled within that subdivision area. So just keep that in mind. And then the last point in that top part is that when you do submit your nomination documents, they all need to come in together. So you can't take them piecemeal. In terms of the candidate eligibility, hopefully the top point there, you can't be in prison serving a sentence of more than 3 years, is reasonably straightforward. You can stand for several positions within the council, but you can't also stand for Environment Canterbury. So either one or the other, just make that point. And you can't have an interest in a contract of over $25,000. That's with the council. So there is some potential for work around there. If you think you are in that particular position and you do want to stand for council, have a look at the candidate handbook. There's some information in there to contact the audit office, and they can work through whether you would be restricted or not based on your particular contract arrangement. The other point there is that you can't nominate yourself. It has to be somebody else other than yourself. Can be other family members, can be your neighbour, so long as they are correctly enrolled to support your nomination. And as I noted there before, you can stand for multiple positions. So if you wanted to, you could stand for the mayor, a councillor position, and or a community board position. And then if you were elected to all positions, there would be an escalation process, and you'd have to take the highest ranking position. So in that case, you would be elected as mayor, and you would then be withdrawn as a candidate for the council election that you were nominated for, and you'd also be withdrawn from the community board, and the next highest polling candidates would go into those positions. So you can stand if you live outside the area, but as we noted there before, that your nominators must be enrolled within that area you want to stand for, and if you don't live in the area that you're standing for, you need to note that on the nomination form, and we'll show you that shortly. The last point there, that you can't withdraw after nominations close, so just be aware of that some people come back to us after nominations have closed and say, I've changed my mind, I want to withdraw now. Sadly, that's no longer possible. The only way you can withdraw after that 1st of August date is by medical certificate through incapacity. So just keep that in mind. All right, so the nomination process, and again I'll work through this reasonably closely. We're about to open nominations, so they open on Friday the 4th of July, and as I noted earlier, they close midday 1st of August. And if you are wanting to stand, sadly there's some paperwork that you have to fill in, which is effectively a nomination form for each position you want to stand for, and that needs to be accompanied by a $200 deposit and evidence of your New Zealand citizenship. So those are the required points. Optional points, if you want to, you can submit a candidate profile, and again we'll cover that off in a little bit more detail shortly. Most candidates do, but it's not mandatory. And you can also submit a photo. Again, most candidates choose to do that as well, and those 2 items will go into the little profile booklet that goes out with the voter packs, and again we'll show you how that comes out shortly. And we also ask for your bank account details so that if you are eligible for that $200 refund of your deposit, we know where to send it back to. So you can get your nomination forms from the council office itself or any of the service centres. So you can either pop in there and get a hard copy, or you can download the forms from council's website, print them out yourself and complete them. We're not too worried about how you access the form itself, it's just so long as you are filling in the correct form. And then on the back of the nomination form there's the lodgement details about how you can send that back. So again, you can either drop it back into the council office or you can email it through to us, and those details are on the back of the form, along with the bank account details if you want to pay the deposit electronically by bank account. The last point there we do want to point out is that your details as confirmed candidates will be shown on the council website. So once your nomination process has been, or once your nomination form rather has been processed and confirmed, your name and your phone number and your email address will be listed on the council's website. So just be aware of that. I'll show you on the form shortly, on one of the slides shortly, if you don't want your contact details listed publicly, where to include those. Right, so this is a copy of a nomination form. I'm not going to go into great detail here because obviously the scale doesn't allow that, but just to be aware that it's a two-part form and there's 3 sections on the front and 1 on the back. So the 3 sections on the front, section A is usually just for you to indicate whether you live within the area or not, and if you're standing for one of the ward positions or the community board positions, there will be additional tick boxes on that particular form to indicate which one of those wards or community board areas you want to stand for. And then section B is where the candidate details are listed. So this is your name and your phone number and your email address. And anything that you include in section B is going to be available for public release. So somebody can come in if they want to and look at that front page of the nomination form, and the council will use the details that you list in section B as the publicly available contact details to list on their website. Also in that area is a section for the name that you want to list on your voting paper and whether you are standing for any other positions. Again, if those are required areas, if you want to stand for other positions, you need to list those. And then down the bottom of that particular block, there's the signature and date area. And below that is the nominator details. So your nominator's name and their contact details, and 2 of those are required. And on the back of the form this year, we have listed the candidate address detail, so, and also a phone number and an email address. Those items aren't made publicly available, so if you don't want your details made available publicly, then that's the section to complete. Now what I will say is that we do encourage candidates to list at least a phone number or an email address publicly, so that organisations such as service groups that may want to meet the candidate information sessions have an option or a way to contact you to invite you to attend those particular meetings. Right. Candidate profiles and photos. So as we noted before, these are optional. You don't have to put these in, but most candidates do prefer to put one in. If you are going to submit one, we do want it electronically. So have a look in the handbook. There's some information there about how to do that, the email address to send it through to. Has to be limited to below 150 words, which is fairly miserable, but that's the rules. It's intentionally that way because the candidate booklet will end up with a lot of profiles in it, and it becomes a space issue from a printer perspective. But we do want them in a paragraph style, so no bullet points, no unnecessary bolding or underlining, etc. With the photos, if you can submit those, they must be recent, so taken within the last 12 months, and no hats, sunglasses, or other family members, etc. in the photo, please, just you on your own. Again, more information in the handbook, so have a look there. So here's an example of a profile that will appear in the little booklet, and in this case we've just cobbled this together. This is my colleague Warwick Lamp, who I outlined before. So we've just made a profile for him based on his surname, and immediately under his surname is an affiliation. So he's just made a little play on his surname here, and that's what he wants listed as his affiliation. It's not a membership of a formal group, it's more of a campaigning tagline or something, which is fine. And then below that he's listed whether he lives in the, or we have listed whether he lives in the area or not, and below that his 150-word candidate profile would start. So the information that you can see there has just been selected from the information he's provided on his nomination form, and then we follow with his profile below that. So that's an example of the photo. It won't look very big, so again we encourage you to take it against a light coloured background, and ideally in colour, just so that we get a reasonable contrast. And if you can submit it as a reasonably sized file, as in about a 2 or 3 meg file, it's good. Just gives us enough resolution to play with. Candidate videos. So this is something that the council is doing new this time around, and a number of councils are doing likewise. It's really just an initiative to try and present more information about the candidates, because a lot of the criticism that people have fielded in the past about reasons for not voting is that they didn't get enough information out of the 150-word profile. So this time around, the candidates will be offered the opportunity to participate in a candidate video process, and the invites for those will go out after the nominations have closed. So the videos would be up to, I think most of them will be 90 seconds, so we're saying up to 120 seconds maximum, taken on council premises, so everybody is in the same venue, presented with the same questions, in the same lighting, and so we get some consistency across that process. Those who've followed Tauranga's example, where Tauranga had an election process last year, they offered their candidates that particular process. In almost all cases, the candidates took up the option, and they got very good feedback from that. There was about half a dozen candidates that didn't choose to, who then, once they saw the videos, came back to the council and said, can we be included? So just not sure whether you'll have the luxury this time round of being able to be included if you don't take up the initial invite, but just be aware that that's going to be offered to you. All right, so onto the campaigning side of things. Now, I do just want to try and point this out. Again, one of the developing trends, unfortunately, is that some candidates, particularly in the bigger urban areas, get a lot of negative feedback, particularly through social media. And this is being made available to candidates this time around, just some general tips about how to structure your campaigning if you think your particular campaigning style might attract some criticism. So just, again, refer to the candidate handbook. There's some information there. There'll be another resource page slide coming up shortly with some other links on it. But the point that we want to make here is that if you are threatened, your first port of call is to the police. So report to them anything that has that you have been threatened with, and then they can give you some further guidance from there. Campaigning, again, not mandatory, but most candidates will undertake some form of campaigning. Things we want to point out there is that if you are going to be campaigning, you can't use council resources. The main ones of those are typically their logos and any branding colours they have, and their social media feeds. And again, we'll cover that off in another slide shortly. But any campaign expenses that you incur must be declared and returned, and we outlined that at the beginning there. And that cost is the candidate's cost, and I'll show you that in another slide shortly. But you must include authorisation statements on any campaigning material that you put out, and that's a text that this material is authorised by, either the candidate's name or their agent's name, and then some address contact details for either the candidate or their agent. And again, I'll show you an example of that shortly. Candidate campaign material, as I noted earlier, is largely not something that we can control as electoral officers, but what you do say is, or does have to be factual, and it is subject to the Advertising Standards Authority guidelines. And if you're going to do some campaigning, these are the costs that apply, or the limits that apply. These are population based, so just bear that in mind. Most candidates won't go anywhere near that maximum, but I think the bottom point there is the pertinent point, particularly the last sentence, that the expenses are the candidate's responsibility. Council doesn't refund anybody for any campaigning costs, so just keep that in mind. Again, a little bit more on that, and there's more information in the handbook. Everybody has to put a declaration in showing what those costs have been, even if you don't spend anything. This year, the period that you have to declare your costs from actually starts after the nomination date, because of that shuffle of dates that the government did to the actual overall election period. So any election expenses incurred from the 11th of July have to be included in your declaration. Plus, you need to account for anything that's incurred prior to that or after the 11th of October date that relate to your campaign and continue into that campaign period. So examples of that would be if you are doing some campaigning now by way of a public notice, and it went into a daily newspaper prior to the 11th of July, that doesn't need to be included because the effective shelf life of that particular process is considered to be 1 day. But if you did a website development back in February that continues into October, and you paid for that in February, then you would need to apportion that cost and bring into your election expense campaign the period, or the value of that covers that 11th of July to the 11th of October period. So there's more information on that in the handbook. In due course, those declarations that you return are made available from Council's website, and people will check them out to see how valid they look, and if there's complaints about it, we have to refer those on to the police. So just be mindful of that. You don't need to submit your invoices and your receipts with your declaration. You hang on to those in case anybody challenges you for them, but we just submit the declarations for public inspection. All right, election donations, and I won't go into too much detail on this because, again, this is something that's typically more relevant for the bigger urban councils, particularly where there's political parties involved. But if you do happen to receive a donation of over $1,500, it has to be declared. So in that case, you need to list who that donation has come from. And there's rules around trying to circumvent that, so just be aware of that. You can't split the donation up or claim that it was anonymous if in fact it was made by electronic submission, or somebody went through an agent. Generally you can find out who that has come from. So again, more information in the handbook about that, but just to be aware of that requirement if you do come by some donations. Election signs, so some candidates will use this as a campaigning tool. And if you are, then things to be aware of, typically that the first day the signs can go up 11th of July for Selwyn District Council candidates, and they need to come down on the 10th of October. So each council will have their own rules about that. So Christchurch, for instance, might be quite miserable by comparison. Yours are reasonably generous by the look of it for covering the whole period. If you're going to put signs by state highways, you need to be particularly careful. NZTA don't like that as a rule. So again, check in the handbook. There's some more information in there about state highway signage placements. But again, keep in mind that anything that does go up onto signs does need to have that authorisation statement on it. So here's a couple of examples of signs. So the one on the right is not a good one because they've, in that case, used an imitation voting document, and they are showing candidate names and a direction on who to vote for. So you can use a stylised version of that with just your name and a tick or something to that effect, but the moment you start showing other candidates with an intention, you're getting into this misleading advertising process, and that's where we have to come back to you. In both cases, you'll see down the bottom there is that authorisation statement, and in this case they are old versions of that where somebody has listed the actual address of the agent. That's no longer just the only option you can have there. You can have email addresses or phone numbers, etc., so refer to the handbook for that. This one is an example of somebody that's being too honest with their sign. This was a joke originally, but it's an example of what they put up, and in this case initially the authorisation statement wasn't there. When we went back to him, he told us it was a joke, and he shortly thereafter took the sign down, but he got such good feedback on it he wanted to stand the next time, but never got around to it because in this case he was standing in Tauranga, and the commissioners then were appointed and there was no subsequent election. These ones aren't signs as such, but we do want you to keep your election signs away from them, and you'll see the orange bin there. They'll be a little bit more prevalent this time round for most councils, and when they are put out with in the voting periods, there will be signage on that for when they'll be available for placing voting papers into. Social media, this is a council resource, so in theory this is what council wants to do. So they want to keep their resource neutral, and they will basically be undertaking processes to check their social media feeds and make sure that if there's something goes up on there that has a hint of electioneering, it'll typically get removed. So that's the theory of what the council is looking to do. Effectively, if you want to do some processing or campaigning through social media, just stick to your own channel. This is how the councils will generally police it. The bottom point there is probably the pertinent point, and what we get is a lot of candidates after the voting documents are delivered then go online and post a photo of their completed voting document, and that's where we then have to jump on and follow up with those candidates to please remove those photos, because the moment you show a photo with a completed voting document on it, you're straying into that election offence area. So we have to come back to you and point that out. If you do want to encourage others to vote, just leave your voting paper in the envelope and show a photo of the envelope. Election offences, not going to get into too much detail there, but just to make you aware that probably the treating one is the most common one that people trip up on, where some of them will rush off, some candidates will rush off and get things of reasonably low value arranged and start giving them away, such as pens, fridge magnets, things like that, notepads. If we become aware of that, if somebody complains to us that that's happening, we have to come back to you and you need to be aware that that potentially could lead to a prosecution, so don't do that. Our general focus point is usually around the authorisation statements. So commonly people will put ads out in papers or put out billboards, etc., without that authorisation statement. And again, we have to come back to you and get you to correct that. All right, quickly going to whiz through these remaining points just to make you aware that electoral rolls are available from the end of this week. You can go into any of the council service centres and check them. They're a good point for checking that your nominators in particular are correctly enrolled to support your nomination. And as a candidate, you can purchase a hard copy of that from us if you want to. Details in the candidate handbook if you want to do that. If you want a soft copy, you have to go through the Electoral Commission. And again, there's information in the handbook about that. Voting process, again, all postal voting still. Sadly, the legislation changes didn't bring in any online voting options for us. But as candidates, I think the point to note there is that deliveries start from the 9th of September. So just make sure your campaigning is organised for around that time to maximise that impact. Election results, this is the point that most people, other than just the candidates, are interested in. So we will issue 3 versions of the results from about 2 o'clock on the Saturday the 11th of October. First one is just a progress result. The second one will come out on the Sunday. It'll be a slightly firmer result, but it's still only a preliminary, so subject to change. And the last one is expected on the 16th of October after we've processed those special votes. At that point, we declare who the elected candidates are and they start coming into office shortly thereafter. So that's quickly this particular point here. This is where we hand over to the council, and the council staff will contact those successfully elected candidates and invite them to the swearing-in ceremony. You can't do anything as a newly elected member until you've done that swearing-in process. Resources, we're just about at the end, but again, check these sites out if you think you need some more information about particularly how to structure your campaign. And as Sharon has noted earlier, some of that information is available from Council's website and through her resources. And if I can get the clicker to go. So that's the last slide. Thank you for persevering with me. I realise that's a whistle-stop tour, but if you do have more information or more questions, I'm not sure we've got an opportunity to raise those online, or come back to Therese or myself, and we will look to respond to those as quickly as we can. Thank you.
That's great, Anthony. Thank you very much. That was really informative and much appreciated for your time this evening. Actually, one of the questions that we've just had in was asking about the election results, and I think you've covered that off really nicely in your third to last slide for the person that asked that question. We've had one additional question too. A question was, could a new council reverse decisions? So there is always protocols with regards to decision making, and that is usually laid out under the Local Government Act. So any requirements to change decisions must comply with the Local Government Act, and it must have regard to the significance and engagement policy. And the basis for what the original decision was. So those are a couple of really important things, and it must have regard to other relevant policies adopted by council or any other act as well. So yes, it is possible to change resolutions, but those are really 3 key important points. It must comply with the Local Government Act, and it must give and take into regard the significance and engagement policy. I don't know that we've had any further questions. I beg your pardon, we have got one. How will voting papers be delivered to voters that do not have a postal delivery to their residence, e.g. Castle Hill and Arthur's Pass? That's actually a question for Anthony, I would say.
So the voting papers will be mailed to everybody that's listed on the parliamentary electoral roll that has a residence point within Selwyn District Council's area, and they'll be mailed to the postal address that's listed at that point. So if you don't have a postal address at that point, then you need to come back to council and apply for a special vote, and those details will be advertised once the voting process gets underway in September.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Anthony. We don't have any further questions, so I'd like to thank Anthony for his time this evening, and thanks Steve for talking to the Malvern Community Board. Thank you to everybody that has joined us this evening. We appreciate your time. We hope that you find this really informative, and again, we will have lots of handbooks, guidebooks, documents available to you, and best of luck for your decision whether to stand. Thank you.
Yarite mai, rehita mai.
Get set, get registered.
If you are not on the list, you don't get to vote.
Check if you're registered at vote.nz.